Hi everyone and welcome to Up Late with Ben Northey. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm on and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to begin by reaching out to all of the musicians and music teachers out there doing it tough at the moment. We hope it won't be too much longer before we can all get back to doing what we love, and that's making and sharing music. And whilst the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra is unable to perform live concerts for you at the moment, these relaxed weekly chats are all about us just having a chance to meet and learn some more about some of the wonderful musicians in the MSO, to discover some more about their lives and their journeys in music. And hopefully it won't be too long before we can get back to live music here in Melbourne, which I know is something everybody involved with music just can't wait for. So stay positive and hang in there, everyone. Now, I know it's a little strange having a show titled Up Late with Ben Northey, which starts at 8 p.m. But for those of you outside Victoria, but you're just going to have to believe me when I tell you, here in Melbourne, 8 p.m. is literally the new midnight, and I'm not even joking. So I should also mention that during the chat tonight, you can send through questions in the comments section of YouTube and Facebook, and I'll do my best to get to as many of them as I can throughout the conversation. Now, tonight's guest has had a fascinating and inspiring journey in music, one which has taken her across the globe. She's a relatively new member of the MSO, having joined the orchestra in 2014. I suppose relative by the standards of some other players who've been in the orchestra for 4 decades. But it's my great pleasure to welcome MSO French horn player Abbey Edlin. Thanks for joining us, Abbey.
Hi, Ben. How are you? It's nice to be here.
I'm great. How are you? Yeah. I know you've got 2 little ones there. Have you got them safely tucked away? Is Richard,
hopefully,
your husband, looking after them?
Almost tucked away, I think. I'm doing much better now that daycare went back this week. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, yeah. That must have been a game changer. Well, my 8 and 6-year-old, it's technically bedtime here. I could be interrupted at any moment. It'll be a miracle if I get through this without them coming and kicking over the laptop. But anyway, look, it's interesting to me, Abbey, that everyone has a unique pathway to a career in music. And yours is a fascinating and inspiring journey. And I wanted to start out by finding out how it all started for you with the French horn. Because, you know, it's interesting, was it always about brass instruments for you when you were a younger student, or was it a more broad approach to music?
I actually, when I was very, very young, sort of probably only 6 or 7, I was in a Saturday morning recorder class, and they did a demonstration day at our morning music classes, and everyone brought around these instruments, and someone brought around a French horn, and I remember thinking, wow, that thing looks amazing. And I was the only kid in the class that could make a sound on it, and it was so loud, and I just thought it was awesome. So I said, I want to play French horn. That's the one I want to play. But because I was in Invercargill, and it was quite in New Zealand, it's quite a small town, we didn't have a big orchestra, and there wasn't really an orchestral program. They said, oh, look, you know, we don't really have any French horns here for you to learn, and you're too small. How about you play a cornet, which was, you know, there was a really strong brass band scene down there. So they handed me a cornet for the next year for my lessons. So I was a wee bit disappointed that I didn't get to start out on the French horn. But yeah, I was always keen on brass when I was little.
There's a good brass band scene in New Zealand, isn't there? Like from my time in Christchurch, there's that fantastic Woolston brass band that are there in Christchurch, and all across the country there seems to be quite a big movement for brass. I mean, was it something that you could work your way up through the ranks and join a junior band and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, it really was. I started out in what were we, the H&H Cougar Brass Auxiliary Brass Band.
Cougar Brass.
Yeah, and they were awesome. I was, you know, but I was terrible. I was that kid. My instrument lived in the boot of the car week in, week out. And I remember showing up, you know, for my lessons, and I always had all the excuses under the sun why I, you know, and guaranteed my teachers that I've been practicing. And, you know, now that I teach, I can see right through all those excuses. But I remember Mum saying, you know, oh, have you done much practice this week? And I was like, yeah. She said, well, why is your instrument still in the boot of the car, sort of thing? And it wasn't till they asked me if I wanted to move up into the senior band, and I was just mortified because I was so bad. I couldn't read music very well. I was sort of falling behind a little bit, and my friends were already getting way ahead of me. And so I realized very quickly, if I didn't start doing some practice, I was, you know, sort of miles behind, and that was a real motivator when I moved from the D grade band into an A grade band, and it was a real steep learning curve. All of a sudden I was playing these really difficult brass band test pieces.
So hard that
they're
stuff. Like,
insane.
they're
it's
virtuosic, aren't they?
Yeah,
They're
so
just incredible.
fast and difficult. Yeah.
Well, so you must have had amazing teachers, that really wanted you to do well. But where was the next step from playing the cornet in the brass band? Because it seems like you went to the tenor horn at some point, and even you were singing, right? Is that how it all?
Yeah, I did. I moved on to tenor horn. They needed a tenor horn player in the band, so I moved on to the tenor horn, and I played tenor horn for quite a few years actually. And I progressed into the national band of New Zealand. So I did a couple of overseas tours with the national band, which was amazing. I mean, I got to, as a really young person, I got to travel, all that sort of stuff. And we also did contests. Our local brass band, every year we did a national contest and a provincial contest. So every year I got these trips away from my parents. I got to go and, to little places around New Zealand and compete against other bands. And it's a real steep learning curve. I played a lot of solo things and things like that when I was a kid. And
is that when you got the bug, do you think? Like, was that the time where you thought, hey, this could be for me, this music thing? Or
not quite. I mean, I loved it, but I didn't ever think that music was something I could have a career in. But I also sang for a very long time. My mum had a beautiful voice. She's got a beautiful contralto voice. And so I always thought, oh, maybe I could be a singer. I'd love to sing. And so when I went to university in Dunedin at Otago University, and I was playing tenor horn and singing. I was studying performance voice as well, and I thought that singing was something I was going to do more long term. But once I finished my degree, I was really at a loss. I didn't know quite what to do with myself. There was a national brass band tour to Kerkrade, to the National Brass Band Championships in Holland, and we were touring through Europe, and I desperately needed to save some money, and so I got a job in a bank, and I was working as a bank teller to save money.
You got a real job. You got a real job, Abbey.
That I was terrible at. I'm not good with numbers. I don't read numbers well.
I'd say that's a problem if you're going to work in a bank. That's not a good start. Hi, I'd like a job. I'm bad with numbers. What have you got for me?
Well, basically they said, oh, you actually didn't do very well in the basic maths and number sort of recognition test, but you seem friendly enough, so we think you'll be okay.
In. I love it. Low standards at the banks in New Zealand.
I know.
That's great.
Yeah. I won't say which bank, but.
And how long did that last? That period at working out of music?
I was about a year. I was living in Christchurch. I moved from Dunedin to Christchurch with my very new partner at the time, Richard Shirley. So it was a long time ago now. He's now
He's in the other room with your kids.
Yeah, he's hiding in the other room putting the kids to bed. So it turned out pretty well. But I spent a year working in a bank, but I was pretty miserable. Music, there was just a massive hole in my life that, I was playing in Woolston Brass Band, but I wasn't doing a lot of other playing.
Yeah. And so you were living in Christchurch.
Yeah, I was
at that point in time. Look, this is very late to get to the French horn. Like, I'm conscious of the fact you're a pro player, and you're in your early 20s at this time, and you haven't even really gone back to that yet.
Yeah.
So how does that work? How does this happen?
I actually have a huge debt that I owe to a very good friend, Grant Sinclair, who's a trombonist. We grew up together in Invercargill, and I remember I was chatting to him he'd been playing with the orchestra in Christchurch, and we'd caught up, and he was like, Abbey, what are you doing? You just seem miserable. You're working in a bank. You're not really doing anything. He said, why don't you, you always talked about playing French horn. Why don't you just give it a go? You've got all the time to do it. And I said, I couldn't do it. I'm nearly 25. I've started too late. I don't even know how to play a French horn. I don't have an instrument. And he's like, leave it with me. We'll sort this out. And about a week later, he called me and said, okay, right. I've been in touch with the Central Band of the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and because he was playing with them at the time in Wellington, he said, they have said that you can have an instrument on the condition that when you move here next year, you will play with the band. I was thinking, what is he talking about, me moving to Wellington? But he said, I've spoken to the university, and they are willing to sort of cross-credit some of these papers that you've done at Otago University, and maybe we can put together a postgraduate degree. I've spoken to the one of the horn players in the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra, Bernie, and he's waiting for you to call him. You're going to get French horn lessons with him. You've got 3 months and you've got an audition for Victoria University in Wellington, and you're going to move to Wellington next year and play the French horn, basically.
We all need a friend like that.
Yeah.
But isn't that amazing that he really, saw your situation and believed in you to the point where he wanted to do that for you and actually set that up.
I think he just left me with no, I mean, he didn't obviously force me to move to Wellington, but he left me with no excuses to go, this is all too hard, I can't do it. He showed up at my house with this beat up old French horn and a big old Holton French horn that had a big sticker that said G-spot on the front of it. I don't know why, but it was there. And I looked at it and went, I don't know what buttons to push. I don't know how to hold this thing. And I showed up for my first lesson, nearly 25 with this instrument. And I felt sorry for Bernie, who's a bit of a character himself.
Oh, Bernie. Well, we should just hold up a second and talk about the legend. I need a sip
of wine to talk about Bernie.
Have a sip of wine, the legend that is Bernie Shapiro, because Bernie plays French horn in the orchestra I'm chief conductor of in Christchurch. And Bernie is one of the all-time great orchestral characters. I mean, extraordinary kind of early century mustache, got the military gear, drives an army jeep. He looks like he's walked straight off a Spitfire from the Second World War, and so it must have been, he's a fantastic bloke and an incredibly good horn player. It must have been great to learn from him.
Oh, it was really good. And I'm kind of glad, if anyone, that I learned from, that it was Bernie when I picked up the horn, because he had so much patience for me. I showed up and I'm like, okay, how do I hold this thing? And he just, I think he said, so how much time have we got before we have to do this audition? But he was really patient with me. He just took me through, we focused on the study. I had to play one piece, and that was like all we worked on to get me through the door.
Hey, Abbey, I was wondering, do you think the singing experience and training really helped you with French horn? Because I know it's one of those things, you have to hear it in your mind, don't you, to really play it accurately.
I think it really did. I think it helped just with my pitch and things, because the French horn it's notoriously difficult to pitch because we have so many different really close together harmonics. It's really easy to miss the note that you're going for. So being able to hear that and sing it in your head is really helpful. And also I think growing up with, my mum had an incredibly rich contralto voice. And just hearing that was part of my everyday life. And so that sound has always stayed with me. I knew the sound I wanted to make on the instrument, and even if I wasn't quite there yet, I knew where I wanted to be, even though I couldn't initially play terribly well.
Yeah. Also, you won the audition, obviously.
Oh, no. They took a real gamble. I think they basically, Grant kind of said, look, her audition might not be great, but take a chance on her. She's a really good brass player. She's new to the French horn. She'll improve rapidly, I'm sure. And they took a bit of a gamble. And I remember, being so nervous that I wouldn't pass this audition. But I think they took a chance. Maybe they saw something that they thought was okay. And I'm so lucky to this day that they did. And I remember still practicing late at night and things at the university because I was so bad. I was so embarrassed to play basic scales, and I kept getting the wrong valves and things.
There's nothing like sheer terror to motivate you to practice, is there? Just the fear of not doing it properly. And so, that must have been a good experience then, to get some valuable time in a big ensemble like the Air Force Wind Band. Tell me a little bit about that time.
Well, the Central Band of the Royal New Zealand Air Force is based in Wellington, and it's a really big band, and there are a lot of students that play in there. So the personnel kind of change quite often, because it's almost a rite of passage for music students to show up in Wellington and join the Air Force Band, and you get a bit of pocket money, and it's quite a social thing, but it's also a really high standard. We play some amazing concerts, a lot of education concerts and things. There's also the parades where we used to have to stand out in the cold and march and things, but that's what character building,
To get cold in New Zealand, I didn't thought it was just tropical.
Barely. And the wind in Wellington trying to hold on to a French horn.
Oh, nightmare.
But no, that was really fun. And, that was where I sort of cut my teeth playing a lot of really technical stuff in that band that was really good.
And so you and Richard were very well together by this time and had been for a while. And then you kind of had to go your separate ways for a time. Talk about that, because I think that's something that a lot of musicians can relate to, is they've been in a relationship, particularly with another musician, and all of a sudden, it happened to me and my wife, Joanne, as well. She went off to Salzburg to study, and I went off to Finland, and we were kind of in that long distance relationship. How did that work for you and Richard?
Yeah, we were both studying in Wellington. I had just finished, and Rich was studying jazz trombone, and we both decided we were going to move to Melbourne, and he was going to do his masters with Michael Bertoncello, who was at the time this second trombone with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, and he was an awesome teacher, and Rich was really excited about studying with him, and I thought that I would just get some casual lessons and see how I'd go, just see how I would go in Melbourne. And but before that, I'd auditioned for an orchestra in London, a chamber orchestra, sort of like a professional development year with an orchestra called the South Bank Sinfonia, which is a small chamber orchestra made up of sort of young emerging young professionals basically. And I auditioned. They have an affiliation with the Southern Sinfonia in Dunedin, and the conductor was in Dunedin at the time, and they were holding auditions there. And I auditioned for this orchestra, but I didn't get it, and I didn't get a position. So I thought, oh well, it wasn't meant to be. We'll move to Melbourne. And then a month or so later, I got a phone call saying, oh look, our actual principal horn, who was it was supposed to be, I think, Sam Jacobs at the time, but who is now the principal horn of the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. He's moved from London. Yeah. Yep. He just couldn't do the course in the end. He was supposed to be playing with the South Bank Symphony, but he was just too busy, and he was already getting a lot of work in the UK, and so he didn't do it. And they said, look, you were one of our runners-up in the audition. Would you like to still take the place in the orchestra? And I sort of thought, okay, how long have I got to sort of get there and sort my life out, basically? And I had about 2 weeks before I had to pack up my life and move to London, and Rich was already really settled on his course in Melbourne, so we went our separate ways for a year. He came over for a month or so in the middle of the year, but it was pretty tough. Yeah, we were very long distance.
Oh, I can imagine. And so he also played, because he's a trombonist in the MSO,
Yes. Yep.
and he played in the South Bank Sinfonia as well during that time, which is, I think, where I met you for the first time.
Yeah, it was.
When I was in London conducting and had a concert with the South Bank Sinfonia, and I do remember distinctly these two very chirpy young Kiwis, who were full of adventure and great charm. And I just remember how high level that group was too. I mean, that must have been an extraordinary experience to work with some of the real top emerging talent coming out of London and all of Europe at that point, wasn't it, really? Yeah,
I felt really, really lucky, actually. It was, I mean, that was definitely what made me realize that I wanted to be an orchestral musician. Before then, there's that whole, I'm a New Zealander, obviously, with the accent, but I think Kiwis, we often tend to think, we're not good enough to do that, or I can't, I'm just this little person from New Zealand, I won't be good enough to play, which is ridiculous, because we compete at a level just as, we're as good as anyone else in the rest of the world. But I think because we're so isolated, it's sometimes hard to compare yourself. And I was a bit worried that I was just not going to be good enough, but it made me go, I can actually do this. I'm fitting in with this orchestra, and it was an amazing bunch of people. And we played, and a lot of the repertoire that we played was stuff that I wouldn't normally get to play as a freelance musician. A lot of 2-horn pieces that, normally when you're freelancing, you don't step into an orchestra until they need more than 4 horns often. So, you're sitting down the line and horn 7 or 8 or something, whereas I got to play in these sort of Beethoven symphonies and Mozart
and the early repertoire.
Early repertoire.
I think people who aren't brass players and aren't French horn players might not understand about the fact that there's that division between high and low horn. When you audition for an orchestral job, 1 and 3 are considered to be high horn jobs, and 2 and 4 are low horn jobs. And it's kind of a specialization. Yeah. But in an orchestra like that, I guess you've just got to do it all, don't you? Yeah.
I had a really great partner, the other horn player that was playing in the orchestra. We sort of shared everything out, and if a week came up and there was something that one of us was really, I really don't want to do this, or I really do want to do this, we managed to kind of balance each other out quite well. And you just sort of had to play anything and everything. And I'd always told myself when I was freelancing that I wouldn't specialize one way or the other, because you sort of cut yourself out of half of your opportunities. So I tended to play all over. Well, you have to play all over the range of the instrument anyway, but I didn't try and pigeonhole myself as either a low or a high horn player when I was younger.
Yeah. Well, that must have been a magical time. What was the name of that church? Was it always the same church behind the South Bank Centre? St. John's Waterloo. Yeah. Beautiful acoustic. We played Brett Dean's Testament in that concert. Yeah. I'll never forget it. It was all kinds of Beethoven 8. Yeah, it was wonderful. And I just came away just beaming from that experience of working with such energetic, enthusiastic young musicians. So look, meanwhile, Richard has got a job back in Australia, hasn't he? So this has complicated things even further in the soap opera of your romance.
Yeah.
What was he doing?
Towards the end of the year, we were deciding whether he would possibly move over to London or whether we were both going to move to Melbourne and settle there. When he won a job in the New South Wales Police Band. And so he sort of said, well, look, it's a paid playing job, and I thought, well, it's close to home, because eventually we wanted to be closer to New Zealand, and I didn't know if we wanted to live in the UK forever. So I packed up and moved to Sydney with Rich, and I was sort of getting lessons and freelancing a little bit, and I spent 4 or 5 years in Sydney. I can't remember.
So you obviously had plenty of work there. I mean, that's, before COVID and everything, that's the miracle of that opera house, isn't it? Because there seems to be quite a lot of work, particularly with the opera orchestra as a freelancer. So you must have got a lot of experience with different types of music, different types of playing.
Yeah, I was incredibly lucky, actually. I did. I had quite a good freelance career in Sydney. I was working a little bit with the Sydney Symphony and with the Australian Opera and Ballet Orchestra, which sort of breaks my heart to hear what's going on with them at the moment. It was such a wonderful orchestra to especially as a young freelance musician, learning some of that amazing opera and ballet repertoire, and they were just such a welcoming orchestra. Really made me feel really at home, and so I learned so much in that year, switching from a pit orchestra to a really big symphonic orchestra on the stage with the symphony, and it was just a really good time, an amazing time in my career, I think.
And so ultimately an audition came up with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, which you went for, and this was quite a significant experience for you in your development, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was one audition that came up. I'm not sure what year it was, but I remember thinking, I'm so prepared for this. I have worked so hard, and I'm really on top of this. And I did the audition, and I didn't even make it past the first round, and I was devastated. I was so gutted. I just thought, it's really heartbreaking. But then I took stock and sort of sat back and thought, well, actually, there are so many basics that I missed out on when I started playing horn, because I came really late to the French horn, and I had a real crash course in how to play. There were a lot of basics that I didn't really spend the time working on, because I had to learn repertoire, I had to learn recital music, and I had to learn orchestral stuff really rapidly. And so I sort of thought, well, look, there are things in my playing that I'm not happy with, and I was teaching a lot. I was really, really busy. And so I said to Rich, I said, look, I came over here to be a horn player and not to be a teacher. For the moment, I need to pull some time, pull back a little bit on the teaching. And I mean, I didn't drive at the time, so I was commuting for an hour and a half on buses and trains and things to teach an hour of lessons. And then, so it's so much time I was spending. And so I cut back some of those lessons that were a lot of time, expending a lot of time, and just sat in a practice room and spent hours and hours,
Yeah, but isn't that interesting?
Basics. Yeah,
it's a good lesson for young musicians who we all have knocks and experiences that really dent our confidence.
Yeah,
and to take that as a gift and as a learning, if you can approach those moments with the right attitude, and as you did, realize that it had exposed some certain things in your technique and your setup that you wanted to fix and change. And then you've got the ability to know what they are that you wouldn't have known if you'd got the job and it was all smooth sailing. You wouldn't have had those opportunities to find that out. So how did that then play out with the next audition that you did?
Well, I knew they didn't appoint, so I knew they were going to re-audition, and I think it was going to be about 6 months' time. So I thought, okay, this time I want to be absolutely as prepared as I can be. And I did so much work on a lot of basics, and I took all those excerpts apart and found out not just why I couldn't play each excerpt or each audition piece, but what was going on with my playing that was making it difficult, and what I could work on in my playing. And I had to become my own sort of harshest critic, a lot of recording and a lot of listening back. And I played to loads of people. I was always bothering people to will you listen to me play such and such a piece? And that was I remember showing up the next time the audition came around, and I thought, whatever happens today, I literally couldn't have prepared anymore. This time I really did feel really good. And I remember walking off stage after the first round, and I think I fist pumped. I was like, yes, because I was so happy for me. And I've never done that in an audition before. I'm normally so nervous, but I was just really happy. I thought this went on stage or in the audition as it could have gone in the practice room, and I didn't care at that point. I was like, I don't even care what happens this time, but I made it to a second round, and that for me was a real confidence boost. I thought, okay, I know how I can work in an audition. I know what I need to do for me and what works for me preparation wise, and so I used that.
You had removed the pressure from yourself.
Yeah, I think so.
That would have helped somehow as well. And so, I mean, this seemed to have led to other opportunities. So you had a pre-trial in Perth with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra.
I did. Oh, it went really well. They were such an awesome bunch. I had a great time in Perth, actually. And my friend Julia Brooke and I were both on pre-trial against one another. But to be honest, her partner Liam is also a trombonist, so another horn trombone combo. So I think things all worked out for the best, really. He was already working in the orchestra, and it was great. I learnt so much in that time, but I think at the end of the day, the best person won, the best person for, and I came back to Sydney, but I learnt so much in Perth, and they were just such a wonderful bunch of people to play with, and I had a really fun time. And then the audition in Melbourne came up, and by then I sort of felt like, I know what I'm doing now, and I know that I felt really confident within myself. I think that's a big thing. Had a little bit of that imposter syndrome going on for a long time. I thought I don't know if I'm good enough to be here, and when I did win the job in Melbourne, eventually when I got there, it was as in my own right that no one really knew me in the orchestra. And when I got there, I just sort of felt like, well, there are no preconceived ideas about me as a player. I'm just here as my own person, and it was really nice. And
it's a great sort of reminder that you had very solid foundations.
Yeah.
That I think is what I'm hearing in this story, is that you had done the required work to be able to win a job like that. You had the foundations, the solid experience that you could draw on to be ready for that job when it came.
And I mean, we often have a lot of the excerpts are repeated. So one audition might have quite a bit that is similar to a previous one. So you're not always learning everything from scratch. So I felt quite, you're not always having to learn notes and all that sort of stuff when you're starting each audition. Yeah. So I felt quite prepared.
Well, so I guess this again is another test of the relationship, because Richard all this time, he's in Sydney, right? Yeah. So you've got to wait until you pass your trial, and then you pass your trial and he follows you to Melbourne. Is this how it works?
Yeah. We sort of said, look, if I win this job, he was going to move to Melbourne with me, because we just thought it was a really amazing opportunity. And so we were a bit nervous. We sort of didn't want to, jinx the job. So he didn't move over until I'd passed my trial. And once I passed my trial, he came over to Melbourne. And initially he was sort of freelancing and doing a bit of, it was funny because he was doing a bit of stagehand work and operations work and stuff. So he was working with MSO, like shifting stands and things around. And now that when he got the job and showed up, people were like, what? You're playing trombone? Weren't you the guy that was setting up my, music stand?
Yeah, that's right. At that point, he just started ordering everyone around. Excuse me, this stand needs to be lowered. This chair isn't right. Give me another chair. But I mean, that must have been amazing. It actually makes me think about, we haven't got a lot of time to talk about this, but just the whole idea of being in a relationship with someone and working with them in the orchestra in your full-time job. And the MSO has many couples in it, many married couples, Jeff and Prue, Jeff Crellin and Prue Davis, Maddie and Pip Tompkins, David and Natasha Thomas. I mean, the list goes on. I can't kind of imagine what that must be like. I mean, especially with young kids, I suppose, because at that stage you hadn't actually started a family.
No,
but it just seems like a lot of stuff going on at once for the two.
We had a really hectic, I must admit. We moved cities. We had 2 young children, both started entirely new jobs and bought a house, all those things that are supposed to be incredibly stressful life events all happened in one. But, we're a really good team, Rich and I think, and we both kind of balance each other out really well. It is difficult with young children, the evenings are hard because we don't have any family in Melbourne. So whenever we're working, there's someone else having to put our kids to bed and read them bedtime stories, which is really hard. You know, they're 2 and 4, my children. But you know, on the other hand, we often have a lot of time during the day free with them. So we're at the moment we have all the time in the world free, but you know, normally we have a lot of time during the day. So we get to be home with them sometimes when other people might be working 9 to 5. So but it is really hard finding time to practice. We have to kind of sub out a little bit sometimes, and one will use the practice space when the other one's getting something else done, or you know, entertaining the kids. But we are lucky that our kids are, even though they're quite young, they are quite they'll play independently quite well by themselves for a while, so that's good.
Oh, that's good. And I can imagine it, you know, having children and coming back to work. I mean, that's quite challenging as well. I can imagine must be quite nerve-wracking in many ways, having that time away from the regular playing.
Yeah.
How was that experience?
It is. I found it really, I mean, for any of you mothers out there, that you do feel like sometimes when you have had your first child that you almost lose a little part of yourself. You know, you gain this amazing, you know, new person and your whole world changes, and it's so wonderful. But at the same time, I felt a little bit lost sometimes because I felt very disconnected from music at the same time because my world was so different, and I didn't really want to practice. I was exhausted and all those things when Harriet, my eldest, when she was a baby. But going back to work for me was I was quite nervous about it because I'd been away. I felt so removed from that world. But as soon as I sat on the stage, I remember we actually had a guest principal horn with us, Peter Luff from the Queensland Symphony. He was playing with us, and I can't remember what symphony we were playing. It was just 2 horns. And we sat down, and as soon as we played the open buzz, I actually cried. I said, I've missed this. I didn't realize how much I'd missed it and how much a part of me that music really is. And I was really missing that. And I think it's so good for my kids, or for our kids, to see that we're really passionate about what we do and we love what we do. And it was hard being away from it for so long, but at the same time, I was really lucky to have all that time, you know,
and to have that
home
chance
with the kids.
and to work out how much you value it as well.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's been clearly for all musicians the most difficult part of this time, especially here in Melbourne, as we watch other orchestras in other states go back to work here in Australia and start doing more things. You know, our turn will come, but it is very, very difficult. Well, look,
it is hard.
I'm conscious of the time.
I talk a lot, you might have noticed.
No, you're brilliant, Abbey. It's just you're the perfect guest, and it's fascinating hearing you talk about your journey. But I'm conscious that we really should get to the music that you've chosen, because every guest on this show is going to get the chance to choose a little bit of music, even just some short excerpts, and talk about them. And I'm fascinated to hear what kind of music do French horn players love. I mean, what are the composers that you really see on the roster and go, oh yes, this is going to be a good week?
Well, it was really difficult for me to actually narrow it down. I was thinking initially, I thought, it's got to be Strauss, because I love anything by Strauss. The horn parts are amazing. I thought, no, I don't know, maybe. And then I thought, maybe Mahler too. That's another favorite. I absolutely love Mahler too. But all the parts of that symphony I love are quite emotional and a bit sad, and I thought, I maybe need something a bit more uplifting at the moment. And so I thought one of my favorite Beethoven symphonies is Beethoven 7. And as a horn player, especially as a second horn player, Beethoven writes amazing, really fun second horn parts. They jump all over the place, and his music is just, I mean, you know, I just love it. And Beethoven 7 it's really joyful. I reckon the slow movement is not so joyful. It's beautiful and sad, but
but tell me about this, because I mean, you know, Beethoven 7, you say it's joyful, and it is. There's no question, but it's very challenging as well, isn't it? Particularly for second horn, because you have to play super low, and that's a hard part in that the scherzo of that symphony. That must be quite daunting at times to have that level of exposure.
It is. Actually, that's one of the reasons I picked this piece as well, is because Beethoven 7 came up in my trial with MSO, and I saw it on the list and went, oh my gosh, I was really nervous. It's quite a difficult second horn part, and it's one of those ones that often shows up on auditions to sort of test. It's got a lot of high playing and low playing, and there's a little bit that I didn't really know terribly well because that's the other thing, because I came to orchestral music quite late. There was so much repertoire I hadn't played, and there's a little moment in this the second horn player. It almost sounds like Jaws. It's like the Jaws moment, and it was a note that just for me didn't really ever work that well, and it always kind of like just fluff came out, and I was going, I have to play this on stage and trial, and I can't even make a sound on this note. So I was quite terrified. And I spent a lot of time playing low, sort of that note repeatedly, trying to make
just to get it to speak.
Yeah.
Well, before we hear that particular excerpt, let's hear a little bit of the first movement, because that's a bit more joyful.
It's so exciting.
Very high and exciting. This is from an MSO performance earlier in the year in March.
Yep.
And fun fact, I think that was the last gig we played in big numbers at the MSO, wasn't it? It was such an emotional night.
Pretty much.
Yeah, but anyway, you're right. It's just heroic, wonderful horn
You hear
writing.
that moment, and you can't help but kind of smile. You know, when I listen to it at home, if I'm learning that piece and I'm playing it, as soon as it gets to that bum, 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 yeah, but it's just, you know, it is exciting.
It's fantastic.
It's really fun.
And you know, having the two of you, Nico Fleury, our principal horn, you know, he's just such a great player too, and the two of you sound good, so good together. But let's hear, speaking of sharks, let's hear the second movement. So yeah, the Jaws motive.
Significant in the background, and then all of a sudden you kind of realize it's a bit nerve-wracking when you're playing it.
All right, let's have a listen. Abbey, you nailed it. You completely crushed it.
I love that as a horn player, I'm like, I've got this really scary part. It goes but up. There's probably string players out there going, it's two notes.
Yeah, that's how hard can it
scary?
Be? Oh, I think anyone who's played a French horn knows it's not for the faint-hearted at any register, high, low, or anything. But it just sounded fantastic. Now, Abbey, we should get to some questions, because there are some questions that have come in on the chat. There's a question here from Melina Smith. Do the players get influenced by other musical genres, and does that help them in their playing of their instruments? Does it broaden their playing techniques with their instruments? I mean, that's a good question for you with your diverse background.
Yeah, I think so. I think because I grew up, you know, I played in a lot of brass band music has really helped me with my technique and faster, although I always play with my right hand when I think of music, but I'm French horn's left-handed. My partner's we studied jazz trombone for a long time, so we've listened to a lot of jazz music over the years, and so that's always influenced my my playing a little bit. I think that relaxed style comes through a bit, and also you know, opera, because I sang for a long time. I think that sort of sound, I really try and recreate that in my horn playing. You know, I want to have a really open sort of vocal sound, so I think that does influence my playing. Yep.
Yeah, and I suppose the sheer breadth of work that orchestral musicians are expected to perform now, you know, it really rewards that kind of diversity in the backgrounds. There's another question here. What's your favorite performing highlight of your career, and why is it so special?
Oh, man.
They're always hard, these questions.
I know.
What's your favorite? It's like choosing your kid or something.
Yeah. I think probably when I was still on trial, actually, and the orchestra went on tour to Europe, and we were playing in London at the Proms.
Yeah.
And we played in the Royal Albert Hall. That was pretty amazing. It was pretty special playing in that hall and just seeing that sea of faces. yeah, pretty amazing moment. It's this little Kiwi over there playing. I think it was, it
It's
was
just
really awesome.
fantastic.
Yep.
There every now and again, you just have those moments where you have to pinch yourself and think, is
I
this
know.
actually happening?
Is this
But
my job?
it's also, I'm conscious there might be some young musicians that'll watch this, even though it's late, but they can watch it after the broadcast, and to know that we don't know what's possible in our lives. We start out doing something, we have no idea where it's going to lead, and often the only barriers to where we get to are the ones we put on ourselves. And it's fantastic to hear your journey as well. There's another question here about young people and music, and it says, how do you encourage your own children to appreciate music? Is that something that you and Richard actively do?
I think so. I mean, we have music on at home all the time, a lot of the time. When we listen to anything and everything, not just orchestral music. Actually, to be honest, we listen to orchestral music more when we're working and we're learning repertoire. But we've got quite a diverse range of music that we listen to. But we often will put on, if we're putting on orchestral music, we might say to them, "Oh, what do you think this sounds like?" Or, in the Hall of the Mountain King, does this sound like someone's bum 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 bum? Does it sound like someone's creeping up on somebody? Or we make them think about music in ways that it's not necessarily just notes, but actively really listening to it. Or we have fun, and my daughter often makes me put on dancing music, so we put on some ballet music, and my son and Harriet will put on ballet dresses, and dance in the living room, that sort of thing.
It's engaging with the imagination, isn't it?
Yeah, and making it fun so that it's not just this old-fashioned stage kind of music from the past. It's something that can be really fun and that they can engage in,
and just a regular normal part of life, and being a human being. It's just something that we love to do. There's another question here. We've probably got time for one or two more. Does Abbey play chamber music? And if so, what's your favorite kind of chamber music to play?
I'm not playing as much at the moment while my kids are young, but I really want to start playing a lot more chamber music. I actually just did at the Digital Concert Hall, Beethoven septet.
Was it the octet?
Octet, yeah.
The octet, yeah, that's right.
That's how good my brain is at the moment. But Beethoven, anything small chamber groups I really love, because it's a real chance. And I love the Mozart horn quintet and the Brahms horn trio, and that sort of stuff is just beautiful, and that chance to really engage with other musicians really closely, so you're not working with the conductor, you're really working with one another and really listening, and
listening
honing in
in a
on one
different
another.
way. And what about, there's another question that often comes up when hearing from professional musicians about auditions. So I know we've touched on it, but how do you deal with the nerves? I mean, you spoke about that fist pumping moment where you were, woo, I nailed it. That's a great way to finish an audition, isn't it? Just walk out, make sure that they can hear that too. Nailed it. How do you go about dealing with the nerves? Have you got a process, or is it just something that happens?
It's funny because some nights there are some concerts that I think are going to make me really nervous, and they don't. And there's concerts that I think, oh, this is just I've played this piece so many times that I'm not even thinking about it. And I think it's often when I'm taking it for granted, that's when I get really nervous. All of a sudden I sit on stage, I'm like, this is still a performance. I may have played this so many times, but and that's when the nerves can creep up on me. So I think it's just always acknowledging that there are going to be some nerves, not being blasé about it. It's very easy to, because we do this all the time, just to think, oh, this is another concert. And when you're really tired and you have young kids, that does happen sometimes, but remembering that it's still, you're still performing and you still want to give your best all the time. So taking some time just to breathe before I walk on stage and just settle my nerves a little bit beforehand, and just acknowledge the fact that there is an audience out there, and and you never know what will happen. And I think that's, I tend to just, and also at the end of the day, if I play a wrong note or something happens, it's not the end of the world. I've had to realize that, I used to really beat myself up every time I made a mistake or something like that happened, but you can't do that all the time, or you'll just go crazy. So just knowing that the nerves are going to be there and letting them happen, but trying not to let them overwhelm.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice, Abbey. And, I'm conscious that, all of the professional musicians in around the world really have the capacity to be great role models. And I think you're one of those. It's just been wonderful to hear your journey in music and to hear about your life and where it's taken you, and hope Richard's done a stunning job of keeping those children quiet.
I heard some
in the
quiet
next room.
yelling in the background, but I heard some little feet running towards the door, but they managed to be intercepted. So I think he's done really well. I don't know,
he deserves
daylight savings. They're not ready for bed yet. They don't want to.
No, I know that's difficult. That transition will take about 6 months to wind down. But he's earned half of that bottle of vino behind you as well.
Yeah, so we might go and polish it off afterwards.
Good idea. I'll be doing that too. Yeah. But thank you so much, Abbey. It's been great to talk to you, and thank you to everybody for watching Up Late with Ben Northey. It's been wonderful to hear Abbey share her journey, and thank you also for sending through your questions, and to Tara Warra for the lovely vino we're about to tuck into. I will be back the same time next Monday night with another terrific guest, the ultra hip and multifaceted MSO bassist, Ben Hanlon. That's something to look forward to. I'll be broadcasting from managed isolation in New Zealand next week. So I'll either be in a 5-star hotel in Auckland or a 3-star hotel in Rotorua. Could be it's just a gamble. It's worth tuning in just to find out. So I hope you can join us. In the meantime, for all of you, stay positive, take care of each other. Thanks for watching. Cheers and go well.